I feel I was kind of lucky that I was in this like certain time where I got to learn the like traditional animation of 2D, and then got rejected from the animation department, so I couldn't have access to it. So I got to figure it out after I had my drawing foundation and painting foundation.
This is Rob Donnelly. Rob is an illustrator, so really interesting. I'm really excited to, hear what he has to tell us about deadlines, the life of an illustrator, and challenges, successes, whatnot. Bring it on.
All right.
We're ready.
All right. So I'm gonna stand, I think. That's all right? Okay. And let's go back to the beginning here. I was just skipping around. So as a kid, I was very into Disney animation. I was also very susceptible to marketing. So every year they would have like the making of a Disney film to pair along with the Christmas special. And they all seemed happy to be happy animators working happily on these huge projects. And so I decided that's what I wanted to be as a kid. And then I originally come from New Jersey, and an animation studio opened up about 30 minutes from my house, which had Disney animators secretly working for their old college friend at this New Jersey animation studio, where I just kind of weaseled my way into an internship there, which was turned into basically working for free at this place called Il Plenty Animation. And our first animated feature was Officer Buckle and Gloria, or animated short, I should say. And my job was to clean up all the hand-drawn things and then fake this charcoal line drawing of the original book, which was very tedious. But in reward for doing this free labor, I was allowed to do animation workshops and learn about storyboarding and storytelling in general and the principles of animation. This is the camera that, it looks like something that belongs here actually, but it's called like the Oxbury camera. And this is all to shoot 8 by 10 animated cells. And so you needed a lot of gear just to work in animation at that time. And so it took a lot just to actually simply see what your animation looked like. Excuse me. Oh, here's the water. That should work. So fast forward to SVA. That's where I went to art school. I actually was rejected by 2 art schools. I applied to 2 art schools, got rejected by both of them. That was quite a blow to my ego, which was a good thing. I was kind of an arrogant young artist, so it was a good like mind, a little check on my ego there. And it was also, this was around the original Lion King, not the current Lion King. So animation was very popular. So I got rejected by Cal Arts, which is one of the best animation schools, and School of Visual Arts, which is one of the better animation schools. And I didn't know what to do with myself, so I actually weaseled my way into the illustration program. I begged, basically, just let me go somewhere. I have nothing to do. And then I weaseled my way into the illustration program, and then found that I actually enjoyed that more. And then there was no computer program still, so it was just like the fundamentals of drawing realistically or figuratively, so learning about light and shade, color theory, and things that I still apply to my current illustration work, but but in more simplified ways. One of the things that I did as a college student was, just draw people on the commuter trains and subways, a lot of sleepers, a lot of people pretending to read, that sort of thing. Which you can get away easier as a college student. I don't think I could do that as a 40-year-old bald man. I think people would be a little more creeped out these days. Let's see. Yeah, that one's a little out of order. But so when I was graduated from illustration, a lot of the magazines were still doing like oil painted illustration jobs. And oil paint, I don't know if anybody works with that, but it takes 7 days to dry. Digital photography at the time was so-so, so you would actually have to get it shot. And then this started transitioning more and more in the magazines to like line work because there was just a lot more out there. And the deadlines got shorter and shorter. So I found this way of working, graduating from art school, that was basically untenable in the real world. So I didn't become a professional illustrator right away after I graduated. I was a bike messenger for 2 years, and then I didn't realize what a horrible job it was because your endorphins are going all the time from constantly biking, that the pay was horrible, and you're just exhausted. And I told myself, oh, I'll illustrate at night when I get back, which I couldn't do. And so slowly but surely I picked up freelance work. This is my first freelance job, also for free. So during the Q&A part, don't ask me for negotiation advice. If you sense a theme going here, that this is for California, now defunct magazine. No surprise, since they don't pay anybody. But then, I'm sorry, I skipped something here. Another thing in college was an art collective that I joined called Meat House Comics, and it was a bunch of illustrators saying that they wanted to do something that wasn't like a hired project, just for fun, and the only rules for the comics were no pop culture references, no superheroes, and we put out like issues and went to Comic Cons and kind of got our names out that way. And it was also a good network of fellow artists, like with a range of success in the freelance world. So it was kind of a nice network where if somebody was like, oh, like I don't have time to do this job, there was like a chat room where they would recommend jobs to you and just talk about other things like that. And so 2 years working as a bike messenger, it wasn't working. And then through my friend who was trying to get me to put my work on a website, which, is pretty obvious nowadays, but not so obvious back then, just insisted that like he wanted to do it because he was into web design and he needed examples for his web design. And then he eventually got hired at an online editorial site called Slate, which is kind of a left-leaning editorial site for articles. And because it was a web, the deadlines were about 4 hours from when they had the article, or ideally if they had the article. They didn't necessarily always have the article. And I would do 1 illustration a week, and they eventually bumped me up to 2 illustrations a week. But in order to do that, I had to kind of figure out how to jump from this ideal of like all the time in the world to these line drawings. So it was a lot of simplifying. So me kind of joining this like art collective on a lark for doing comics actually helped my professional career. And so these are some of my illustrations. So these are still just line work in pen and ink, and then selected and colored digitally. And so this was for an article that probably a lot of creative people can relate to, but it was an article about how companies like the idea of saying they're looking for creative people, but when it comes down to it, they tend not to actually like it. This was just thinking inside the box how companies don't like creative people. This one was for NPR, actually. Shout out. This was about the effects of teenage drinking on their minds, and the inability, or their minds aren't completely developed yet, and so on. It was about the science. I don't quite remember it, but it's bad, kids. This was an illustration about the surprising number of deaths in baseball as compared to the NFL. This was kind of more of a statistical overview, not like a recent headline. I don't think I would be allowed to like poke fun if it was like a specific person who died, but since it was overall statistical analysis, they let me get away with that. This was simply another article on Slate about the novelist. This guy read a bunch of prestigious novels, and he noticed that a lot of novelists, for some reason, have like a lone dog barking in the distance. And so this article is just about the cliche of dogs barking, and yeah. And then this was around 2006. Web video was starting to become present. This is not a video. Yeah, it's probably a little harder for you to see, so I'll just describe it. But basically, I was asked if I knew how to do web video by the art director. I said no idea. And my first video was something about Rudy Giuliani, using audio about him on his former radio show going off on ferret owners. And so I just lied and said, like, okay, I'll do it. I need money. And I did it on iMovie, which is designed for like family movies and kind of clipping things. It's not designed for frame by frame animation. And so I just was like splicing footage in iMovie along to like lip syncing audio. It was crazy. I hallucinated on nothing. I was just awake, and there was mice juggling mice in the corner of my eye, and then I had to sleep. But I got it done on deadline, is the important thing. Those days are beyond me. The all-nighters are not so much anymore. But that video led to me animating their advice column. So I would animate the Dear Abby letter that would come in. And this one is about a mentor who allows the kid to smoke weed. And it's written from the mother, like, is it cool that the mentor has my kid smoking weed? And so this is how I would break it down. I would just basically paint all the elements, and you notice that they're all on the same kind of perspective. So I could just combine, hands and arms for the different characters. And I'll show you my reel, which this one is a small part of the reel, but it was combining all of these things and bringing them into After Effects. And basically making paper doll puppets. So these are these are all animated advice columns. That's about jobs, unemployment, booze. And I also did a few explainer videos for NBC News about a jerk. A lot of the advice columns is animating jerks, which is always fun. But and then I always change it up a little bit, doing some actual like live painting. And a lot of these are bringing different elements into After Effects. And so I feel I was kind of lucky that I was in this like certain time where I got to learn the like traditional animation of 2D, and then got rejected from the animation department, so I couldn't have access to it. So I got to figure it out after I had my drawing foundation and painting foundation, which definitely helped me get like a unique look, because I wasn't relying on one or the other. It was just whatever fit. And yeah, so we get the idea. I like to animate. So for this, I mean, this is really about it. And then when you're bringing it into After Effects, you're kind of you're just attaching hinges and basically attaching arms, and you're making a puppet but digitally, essentially. And then it has 3D space, so you can push like the background back and things like that.
Would you create separate backgrounds for this, or would it be playing in a white environment on this particular one?
This would be, there would be backgrounds, but very simple. Like, see this? That little tile? You guys don't, but take my word for it, it's a tile. That is turned into like a sidewalk, so just copy and paste, copy and paste. And yeah, so that is a grass element, so just these little things that are multiplied. And you don't want too much attention drawn to the background, so actually, you know, repeating things in these dull patterns so that the character will stand out is also a theory. And then I got to a point where I was just on the computer too much, and I kind of missed actually doing stuff with hands. And so I didn't denounce my old line-drawn cartoon style. I decided to start working in paper and clay, just as I decided to have kids, so it wasn't very practical, but I was just like searching for some new way of doing things. And there's a lot of illustrators who do like digital colored line work, so I was just trying to find a way to stand out. And so this one is one of the first ones I did. This was for my son's room, and these are just different elements of paper for the legs, and clay hands and clay face. The Babe the Blue Ox is all clay, and it's shot downward. So mostly because I don't have the sculpture know-how to build armatures and things like that. I was kind of learning as I was going along, which also made it more fun for me. And so just mixing and matching these things. And then also digitally colored, which went back to my education of doing stodgy life drawing paintings, where they insisted that you paint the model in black and white so you get the value down first and then work color in later. And so
paper hooves?
Yeah, paper hooves, and yeah, it's kind of just the like mixing and matching as much as possible. So if the last thing is clay, the next thing is paper, sort of. I just like the jumbled nature of it. And all of the sculptures and the paper, like they're kind of like the illustration is the final product, so I actually don't keep the sculptures. They kind of go back into this clay graveyard, and then I just water them down and use the clay again. Luckily, I teamed up with an art director for a local weekly paper in Vermont called 7 Days, which Lars actually introduced me to the publisher of 7 Days. And since it's a weekly paper, the pay is a little lower, but with that comes some freedom. And there's a great art director named Diane Sullivan who kind of helps come up with ideas, and it's a lot more collaborative than the average art director. And she's kind of more interested in the concept of whatever the illustration is, and then whatever style she thinks I want to do, or like she gives me free rein. So this is actually a sculpture. So sorry, kids. That is actually laid on top of the approved sketch. So I submit 3 sketches, which is about the average. So the approved sketch I printed out on top, and then I started like working the sculpture on top of that. And so this illustration was just about a couple with opposite eating habits. And so I clean everything up digitally and color it digitally as well. But it helps me to kind of just think in black and white first, and then bring the color in later to make sure I get the depth.
So the lighting is all artificial? It's not backlit or anything in that?
That's a good question. Like, so I take, even though it's one sculpture, I take multiple photos of each element. And the only thing I'm sure of when I'm photographing each element is that the light source remains the same. So that way it kind of matches up when I composite everything together in Procreate. And so these are, blow this up a bit. This is a sculpture on immigration and domestic violence, and how the current immigration program makes it harder for women or any victim to report domestic violence, and there were special visas for this particular situation, or for victims of violence who are also immigrants. It's called a U visa, but the program is currently in danger. And so I did this illustration. And so again, this is a mix of paper and clay, sculpted heads, sculpted hands, and then this one essentially stayed black and white, so it wasn't a lot of coloring. But it's kind of fun to try like a range of subjects in this style. And so this one is a more recent one from Charlotte Magazine about humidity. And again, sculpture, paper, clay. And I have a little time lapse for this one.
And all the texture there has been added?
Yeah, just kind of added noise. It's kind of another unifying different elements. It helps to have kind of a third element in there, just to kind of bring it all together. So it kind of added a little noise.
How many hours, just rough, before you move on, in the cutting and creating physically,
Yeah.
and then the cleanup digitally? Like, is it 50-50?
Yeah, I would say it is 50-50. Like in my head, it was like, I'm gonna get away from the computer and get back to basics, and then it's I mean, it is slowly getting more and more, the more time getting to do the paper and clay things, but like the sculpture thing, I'm figuring out as I go. Photoshop, I know well. So.
You just get lost in the detail.
Right, and it's also helpful that I don't have access to a computer when my hands are covered in clay, so I don't have to. It makes it harder to pay attention to the news, which I'm a political junkie. So, and this is what happens when I'm done sculpting. I have all the photographs brought into Procreate. And this is kind of a short time lapse. Let's do, where are you? So even if the elements are sculpted together, I kind of pull it apart, clean it up, and then smush it back together again. And that's the crazy hair, just made out of paper, and that's pretty much it. And so that's where I'm at now. I was discussing with Julia actually before this started, kind of talking about the difference between fine art, self-motivated things, and doing editorial illustration. And the deadlines are tough, but it's also kind of a more reactive medium. Like I'm just reacting to what writers have to say, and just kind of trying to figure out how to translate that visually, and working collaboratively with different art directors, and with all their different quirks and things like that. So people always say like, oh, you're a freelancer, like you're your own boss, and it's like you just have multiple bosses and you kind of figure it out as you go. So that is just like the quick span with lots of ums and ahs. Hopefully they can be edited out. I just also want to talk a little bit about just the basics of how editorial illustration works, if I haven't covered it already, but it's pretty straightforward and a little old-fashioned about getting your name out there. Art directors still respond to mailed postcards with just a sample illustration and your contact information. And ideally, they pin it up on their board, or they have some sort of organizational system to keep your style in certain areas. So if they say, hey, I want a 3D person, they'll kind of have my stuff filed away there, or somebody else. And then when you get the job, you usually get the article and the deadline, usually a minimum of 3 sketches. They select it, and then you go to work, and then if you do the work on deadline, then they usually hire you back. But so that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So, beautiful work. You didn't talk about the timeline. When did all these things happen? When did you start? What year? When you were starting the different phases?
So I started this style about 3 years ago in earnest. I thought I was reinventing it or inventing it like a style, and then I looked back at some of my old work and realized that I actually had done experiments with it, just never published. And so it was kind of like on the back burner the whole time. When I was working for Slate doing 2 illustrations a week and then 2 animations a month, that was roughly from 2004 to 2014. And so it was helpful to learn how to work professionally and on deadlines and things like that, but it also, those tight deadlines also kind of made experimentation limited. So it wasn't until 3 years where I felt like I have a little bit of wiggle room to try this new thing.
So you mentioned you were in like an indie comics collective like earlier on back in school and everything.
Yeah.
Have you ever done any longer form like narrative work or like?
No.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, I did, the older work I was just referring to was actually a pitch for the comic. But the collective kind of ballooned and ballooned as, you know, as any like network does, like even, you know, pre-social media. You know, our first issue I think had like 10 artists, and then like their last issue had like 30, and like from all over the country, and it just got harder and harder to elbow your way in there, which, you know, makes sense. The reason why I'm so grateful for the experience of that collective was because so many of the artists were more talented than I was, and also, but it was just great to like learn like their work ethic, you know, and just see how they operate. But
You don't have to name names, but is there a client that you'll never work with again? And why?
Luckily I don't remember the names usually. I had to do a bat mitzvah video for a producer friend's friend, and that was hands down the worst experience. Just because it was the 11th hour, and just you know, my client was, you know, essentially a 16-year-old girl. I'm actually not sure when a bat mitzvah is, but approximately that time, I guess. So it was kind of like, why not this? Why not this? With a deadline. And then at the end of that, I was supposed to collaborate with another filmmaker to incorporate my animation, and we didn't meet each other until the last second. So that stands out. And yeah, and Slate was like through no fault of their own, but just like the way the internet kind of, you kind of have to keep up. So a lot of the times I would have to start illustrating or doing sketches without an article in hand. And then I would submit the sketches, and then they would say I misunderstood the article that I never got. So I was like, I'm not. But that's more like chaos more than, you know, malintent or whatever.
So you used to work for Slate. What kind of work are you doing now?
I'm doing work for 7 Days, and which is just a Vermont local paper. I do a monthly illustration in the 2D style for Hawaii Business Magazine, and you know, this one's for Charlotte Magazine, and so a lot of regional magazines, and it's still done the old-fashioned way of just mailing out postcards all over the country, and some things stick. Yeah.
Did you have a series? I'm getting people confused in my head, but it was either cards for the U.S. military or some kind of animation about how to.
Yeah, I can't talk about that. No, just kidding. Yeah, it was kind of a very abstract thing, but I did like training programs, animated videos for like training the military, which was kind of interesting. The things they would, I mean, I didn't join or anything, but they were incorporating like Zen philosophy and into their training and different things like that. And some of the things I actually couldn't know about, which was kind of interesting. Like I had to make these kind of abstract animated machines to show, you know, basically where the soldiers would have to go for certain problems. But so that, yeah, that was an interesting I think it was one, but it was very thorough. and that's the thing. I live in Vermont now, so it's like, I don't talk to anybody. I have friends who work, in DC and Marvel, and they just like they just like trust me because they know I don't I don't talk to anybody out here. But
What about your relationship to Disney and
yeah, that was through another friend through college, and he worked at Marvel Disney Interactive, and I did some work animation for. It was the least popular Spider-Man movie, so it's not like the current one.
Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, wait, I think what?
Amazing Spider-Man, the one in between.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
No, the Andrew Garfield books.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't have anything to do with it. I was just doing the app animation at the end. And yeah.
So what's wobbly? You had talked about wobbly a little bit. You said you'd come back around to it, but you
Oh yeah.
maintain a sense of wobbly.
It's kind of a philosophy. Like instead of like learning 3D programs, I kind of did this roundabout like sculptural way of doing things, which isn't the most efficient, but I kind of have the most fun doing it. And it's just in trying to look distinctive, it kind of helps if everything's not perfectly curved or just falling into these patterns. A thing that I always think about is the musician Tom Waits in an interview. It was one of his later albums, and the interviewer was asking him, he's like, wow, it's interesting, you're kind of like incorporating like these loops into your work. And he's like, yeah, I don't actually do loops, I just scream it over and over again because there's subtle differences there, and then when people see a pattern, that's their cue to stop paying attention. And so that's kind of always stuck with me, and that's also kind of how I accumulate things. Is just I love hearing about the creative process, and no matter what the medium is, like you can always kind of find ways to weave it back into what you're doing.
What kind of software do you use now?
I'm trying to use Procreate as much as possible. It's almost out of spite for Adobe's payment plan that you can't really own their programs, and you have to pay a monthly fee, and you can't really use just the programs you want, or they charge you more. It's Procreate, you buy it, and who's the company who makes it? I'm not sure actually. But
So can you give us a little forensic walkthrough of this one? What are the flaws if you could do this one again? Like what would you want to fix, or maybe it's perfect?
No, yeah, it's everything. Like the moment I send it to the art director, then like I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, this is. Let's see, raindrops. They actually have a harder edge highlight. This is really going to get into the weeds. If you're not into illustration, walk out now. You notice that this paper eye has a shadow. That paper eye's shadow is kind of should be down there. And I think I actually would have liked to crop it here a little more, so it was actually looked more like foreshortening instead of shorter arms.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, this is the kind of things that it kind of goes along with the process. You're like, well, better luck next time. It's kind of.
Well, and it's interesting to see it on a big screen. I always like to see things big before they go to print, because then it's so much smaller. But
Right. Yeah.
see where your airbrush is, the arms disappearing into the,
Yeah.
what's a choice, the raindrops with a little bit of rubber stamping on them.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to see it so big and kind of like, oh yeah, I could never stop.
Yeah. This thing is this thing. Luckily, things aren't printed this big
Yeah,
yet.
no, it's great.
Unless print makes a really, really big comeback, then I'm in trouble. And yeah, with my slate work, like when I first started there, it was originally 72 DPI. So that's another downfall of going on the web, is that resolution is getting higher and higher. And so, you know, I think on modern screen, my 72 DPI illustration would be about that big. But yeah. All right. And if there are no other questions, then I just want to thank you guys for coming out and stopping by and listen to me stammer through this. I don't get out much, so this many people talking to them. I just appreciate you guys coming out. And yeah, I'm not sure when this place closes, but never? Okay. Well, I would like to see what you guys are working on or what's around. So this isn't just a one-way street, but thanks, Lars, for bringing me here to this wonderland, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Like, wow. I gotta